Hello and welcome to 52 Weeks. This week we'll be starting Chapter 7, which is focusing in on utilities. That was just the first page of the introduction. It kind of just frames where we need to be, and the big thing is an integrated approach. Background on the authorities. Capital Region Water is the entity that administers water and sewer services. PP&L, UGI, and NRG are operating power supply systems in the city. There's also various publicly regulated private companies that are doing the data and telecommunications services. The city is responsible for the removal of solid waste, and the Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority is the solid waste disposal company. A bit of the background: comprehensive plans framework for large-scale renovations of the existing housing stock, coupled with the intense investment in limited target redevelopment areas that's discussed in the plan's Housing, Chapter 5, and Land Use, Chapter 2 sections, creates a favorable situation in which to rapidly implement smart utility systems. So this is the crux of utilities, is as we go into planning these things as the neighborhood scale and even large scale comprehensive plan, there's this idea to always keep at the forefront the opportunity to pool this together in smart utility systems. The potential here is that ideally the city becomes a national leader as well as local leader in utilities infrastructure, creating resilient networks, providing such things as smart systems that optimize the use of power and water resources, fiber optic based communication network, transit based living options, convenient personal car optimized living. No one would need to drive in that sense, really looking at the walkability. We talked about that in Chapter 6, mobility. Smart streets that take us from the public space to our destination the quickest way possible. All these things are pulled together in an integrated way in a planning process that should be highly public participatory, where the input is the residents and how they adjust and work with the process of planning. And it's long-term and it's cyclical. It continues to grow and becomes, this is what we do. The capacity is built within the neighborhoods that there's always a group, no matter how much transition happens in the neighborhood, there's always a group that's there or a process that's embedded in the neighborhood, in the urban village, that this is just what we do and we know how to do it. It's very important to involve the 13,000 residents who are under the age of 18. That's all the students in pre-K and K-12 that should be involved in this process so that they witness, they understand this is modeled to them, and it's just what they do when they're going through school as well. There's this community engagement that continues to happen in the civic engagement process, that it's the role of service and volunteering, but also that there's businesses that do support this and partnerships that can also support this system. For Harrisburg to rapidly evolve into preferred technology business and entrepreneurial location for the region, state-of-the-art utilities, particularly data access, will provide the most important deciding factor. Right now, we're actually at our limit, I think, in our technology, because we would be at a different state within our technology growth had the other infrastructure been provided. We're at a point where we need to push some of the technology business and entrepreneurial locations along Harrisburg. If you were to take the technology and looking at how to mesh it back into all of the service-based stuff or the agricultural-based stuff or the healthcare-based stuff that's here in the city, that would be a tremendous leap. This also takes walking with people shoulder to shoulder to help them through that process of why the technology is there and how it's to actually improve the process, not be a hindrance. And that's part of the problem. We can have this through our government system where our documentation and management is upgraded. We can do that with our nonprofits on how nonprofits work. They should be working and operating better, more effective, and it should be data-driven, evidence-based change within these structures. We're just not there yet. Tying that right into capacity and efficiency, quote is, utility capacity and reliability is make or break factor in the location of technology industry, data, healthcare, and manufacturing facilities surrounding areas. Data capacity and speed is critical for the location of IT companies. High-speed fiber connections for internet, information, and telecommunication systems have become baseline considerations for technology firms. So if we're not hooked into what technology firms need and not providing that within our infrastructure, this is not going to change. We're going to stay in the same state. And this takes a tremendous giving up of what we've done in the past and actually adapt to a future state. This is not easy. This takes us working together as a community. We got to recognize that we're harming the next generation that's 20 years from now if things aren't set now. And we don't seem to get that this thing is a cycle, is that if we make the change now and plan for this in strategic goals, we may get there. I hope we get there by 2030. If the city wants to become a location of first choice for startups, fiber connections must be present and active in commercial zones, particularly in the most affordable areas. This is critical when we look at innovation districts. I talk a lot about that and capacity building, and this is something in Chapter 8, economic economic development that we'll discuss in where those areas need to happen in innovation areas. Sadly, the innovation has happened either downtown or focus on midtown, where we look at these startups that happen. That has been the detriment to Harrisburg because it's been so localized to these areas, instead of looking at how do you build the capacity by working together with other neighborhoods to build this up. We're finally, I think, just realizing that within the neighborhoods, and that's sad that it's taken this long in trying to connect these things. And that leads us to opportunities. Major planned redevelopment areas such as the 6th Street Corridor, Meander, and the City Square transit-oriented development surrounded by the Harrisburg Transportation Center offer the opportunity to plan for sustainable infrastructure from scratch, providing the foundation for whole sustainable districts, supporting the whole new economics for the city. Continuing on, providing these key development sites with integrated state-of-the-art communication, data, power, ecological infrastructure, provide Harrisburg with multiple development sites competitive with the most attractive locations in the Middle Atlantic region. As we move to close this segment, one of the things we reach is the net zero energy city, the NZE. How to create an affordable city is the question, and the quote is, utility payments are a factor in companies' overhead, an important part of a household's monthly expense. So we must look at this from an economic point of view and see the impact to affordability living in the city. We pay for the infrastructure that supports and manages how resources are distributed to us. So if we start to look at this and analyze from a technical point of view how water, stormwater, or wastewater is transported, or electrical power is transported, or even internet connections, all these systems should be looked at in a 21st century way. If we were serious about this, we'd start to commit to sustainability in a holistic way. And I talk about the triple bottom line forever, and the 100 resilient cities that's brought up in the comp plan from the Rockefeller Foundation. This is the list of cities reach a resiliency metric. The idea is to get to net zero. What does that mean? Net zero means that when you have all of your electricity is provided within the parcel. So if I turn a light on, I'm using solar or wind, hydro to actually power my home, and I have nothing on the grid. So another way to look at it, it's an off-the-grid living. We can take that even further and understand the connections we have with water and stormwater, runoff, wastewater, and all of this stuff to get to an idea of full sustainability within a city that is hard to achieve, that takes much more work. The energy is really the easier one to deal with. The plans call for large-scale renovations of existing housing stock coupled with intense investment for limited target redevelopment areas. That's again discussed in the plan's housing and land use section. Creates a favorable situation in which the beginning implementation of an NZE infrastructure in individual building systems. Again, this is a coordinated effort. Anytime land development plans are put together, even before that is the larger master development plan, where you're looking at how the small area plans are knitted together in this process and guided through that process. And again, it's holistic of how these systems are integrated and support one another. So how do we reach this? Well, utilities need to be asked to innovate, and also the city needs to be asked to innovate. And this comes from pressure from citizens. This is why it's very important as citizen groups to push into this. The city needs to work with power providers to develop a plan to implement smart grids throughout the city while requiring smart building technology to be incorporated in all new buildings and renovations. Utilities should be asked to provide programs to fully or partially fund integration of smart building technology in new construction and renovation. Due to the city's relatively small area, it is an ideal demonstration site for early adoption of smart house, smart grid systems. So right now we can pilot programs and really develop the methodology from within, training from within, and building this up. By focusing on a net zero energy city, we can also look at it as being a resilient city. Given the number of housing units requiring substantial renovation, the city should target a goal of half of its 25,000 housing units integrated into a smart house, smart grid within 10 years. These are goals that we can put up there and use as metrics to see if we're achieving these goals. This is how the process works. We try to set some goals and objectives and map that out through a time frame. And if we do it, great. If not, then we figure out why it didn't get done. Instead of cycling back and forth thinking, well, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, and we don't know how much we've solved or how much we've actually begun to affect. We don't even know the outcome of the process because we haven't been tracking it. Continuing on that, sustainability is much easier to achieve over an urban district than it is in an individual building. Master planning new development areas and existing neighborhoods should incorporate a sustainability master plan as the core of the document. Now, this goes back to why planning is important. We just don't throw together these master plans in all these areas without having a larger guidelines for this to happen. The city opens itself for chaos when none of this is set and developers can come in and do what they want. They're not going to follow any type of rules other than the least amount to get things done. This is typical. This is sadly how the process works. And the fact that we haven't figured this out or haven't recognized it and done anything to change it is completely on us as residents as well as public officials. So when we look at a resilient city, it shows sustainability is in three components. The first is in energy use. That's including embodied energy aggregated through the construction process, in the building materials, and direct effects to build the structure. And that's also the overall energy use as the life cycle of the building. The second is materials conservation and reduction of waste generation. And the third is the conservation of water resources. These three factors should be considered in any type of planning that we do within the city. What's important that we've said before is this microgrid that happens. Fully segmenting the city into a series of standalone energy precincts provides protective sources for immediate available capacity to counter the system interruption. Ideally, when one area experiences a service interruption or excessive peak demand, the other precincts continue to function normally. This is a change from the central thinking to local thinking and how things are distributed. And finally, the resilient city emphasizes a variety of power generation technologies and location. It requires new large buildings and mission-critical buildings to have the sustainable auxiliary generation, such as gas microturbines, to provide uninterrupted power to the facility and surrounding microgrid. So imagine if we had community buildings that already had this model that they could sustain a group of maybe 4 or 5 blocks around them. That any new building that's designed and construction has this built in as a system of support for the surrounding neighborhood. Imagine what we could start to do when we begin to tie public and private in a way that actually is equitable for those who've been experiencing the most hardships within our city for the past 40 years. This is a huge, complete change in understanding how we're interrelated, interconnected, and need to collaborate within Harrisburg. So this concludes the introduction segment of Chapter 7, Utilities. Please stay tuned next week to see the conclusion of this chapter as we learn more about the process of building our power, our waste and stormwater, and also our network communications networks throughout the city. Thanks again and take care.